Welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations, the official podcast of the Ohio Counseling Association, bringing you updates and conversations from around the state. On today's episode, we're excited to introduce Quebec Gibbons, a licensed professional clinical counselor with supervisor designation in Ohio. With a diverse background in counseling and a passion for community involvement, Quebec brings a unique perspective to our discussions. Like many of us, Quebec wears many hats like husband, father, coach, supervisor, and we believe it's helpful to explore how those roles impact the work we do as counselors. Stay tuned to hear his insights on counseling and community engagement. As usual, I'm your host today, Dr. Marisa Cargill, a counselor and counselor educator here in Northeast Ohio. Let's dive in. Today, we are joined by Quebec Gibbons. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. And I have to say, you're probably one of the earlier listeners who reached out to us saying, hey, I'm a counselor in the community and I wanna be a voice on the podcast and share my experiences. So, Quebec, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am 33 years old. I'm about 5 to 6 years deep into being a therapist. I'm an LPCC S. I recently got my S probably about 6, 7 months ago. I'm actually right in a window that I will be learning brain spotting here in 2 days, the first level of brain spotting. So what I like to tell a lot of people is I'm a master of absolutely nothing in therapy, just good at a lot of different things. So I see ADHD, bipolar, maybe narcissism. I know that we all know that's a super big buzzword. I work with couples. I work with athletes. I work with men with porn issues. I work with teen girls, high school students, college students, career, family issues, divorce, marital, you name it. I am very open to seeing it.
Yeah, sort of a jack of all trades, but certainly we know that you've got a master's degree too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So when you reached out to us, you really, I think, were passionate about trying to push mental health initiatives and conversations about mental health forward and have those maybe meaningful, tough conversations. So tell me, what is it about this work that is meaningful for you?
I've been a product of mental health in regards to I'm adopted. I'm the only black kid in my family. Grew up in a predominantly white area. I have two older brothers. And so when you have that type of family dynamic, and again, being predominantly the only black kid in my classrooms, I went to a school called Massillon Jackson down about, say, 15 minutes, give or take, from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. My graduating class was 500 people, 500 plus. I marched in a marching band of 375 plus people. I played soccer, and we were able to fill three teams of, give or take, between 50 to 60 players. When you're one of two black kids on the soccer team, when you're one of maybe five black kids that graduate in the graduating class, and when you go to church and you see maybe one of a few black folks in the Catholic Church, it's really thrust into your window of vision that there's something different about you, but you just don't know what at an early age. And my parents did a really good job of being willing and open to taking me to therapy. And that was kind of like early on in my childhood.
Hmm.
Set out to be a therapist at heart as a child. And then when I met Sigmund Freud in college, it weirded me out. So I kind of walked away from it just because I don't think
Yeah,
I was mature enough to handle the content at all whatsoever. And
yeah.
so I worked in corporate America for about 2 to 3 years, and I ran out of there like a man on fire. It was then that I revisited the therapy space. I did go and see somebody that worked out of the company that I work for, the Gentle Shepherd, located in North Canton. And that therapist was the first time in my life that I saw an African American male in a position of leadership and power, doing something that I could envision myself doing. And through just like the power of therapy, it reminded me that I wanted to be a therapist, and that my deepest of hearts that I always wanted to primarily help kids that were in interracial families, but it became just so much more than that. Once I got into school,
Yeah.
learning and understanding the impact we can have, um, it just became so much more than that.
Yeah, yeah. So meaning it has like lots of different roots for you and different branches, but that started at a very young place for you and evolved, but came back to like this supporting others through this type of work. That's awesome. I teach a career counseling course as like a counselor educator, so I'm always really interested in like career trajectories and how people came to this decision. So I'm always really fascinated to hear about that. I know that, like you mentioned, your own work, or I guess role as an athlete, and that when we were talking to you about like some of the populations preparing for this interview, you've worked with athletes. What are some of the unique challenges you see working with folks in that population?
So I think that athletes are some of the most forgotten in mental health, even from young ages all the way up to professionals. We put a lot of pressure on our athletes. They deal with a lot of failure, a lot of social media pressure, a lot of internal pressure. Sometimes that's within the family system as well, beyond just themselves. And then some kids get burnt out. It could be college players. Some college players end up becoming like addicts once they lose that athletic identity. Some of our professionals, outside of my favorite soccer player, I'm a soccer guy, like I said. My favorite soccer player is a French guy. His name is Thierry Henry. He did this podcast with Stephen Bennett. I think his name is the Diary of a CEO podcast. He said, once I retired from soccer, I didn't have that cape to put on anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I had to face reality of what it means to be me. And
Yeah.
so I feel very passionate being a former player, being a former soccer coach. So I coached kids from U8 all the way up to high school ages until I became a therapist. And it was the parents that were giving me a lot of validation, letting me know that I was good with the kids. I was not very strong at school. So I had to find some sort of career that worked people to people. And this is my way of being able to continue to give back to that population and really help them with their mental fitness. So that's kind of a term that I've coined is helping athletes build their mental fitness
Yeah.
because a lot of athletes will do everything possible to build themselves up everywhere else except for their mental side. And then when their mental side starts to struggle, then the physical side can struggle. So I want to always try to come alongside those women, those young men, even professional athletes, and help them have the tools to have healthy mental fitness.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate you spelling out some of the challenges they experience and like then how we can come alongside them. I agree, like I witness it, like pressure is like a high stakes no matter the level because of maybe self-inflicted pressure, familial, or even larger I guess like environments, pressure, coaches, schools, um, pressure on like the individual who also is trying to do maybe quite a few things and wear a few other hats. So that's all well taken, like but maybe not as some like maybe not something as many people are aware of. um, so yeah, thanks for bringing awareness to that. Like I'm saying, they might wear a lot of hats. It seems like you have also worn a lot of hats, and continue to do so. That you are a counselor, you're a father, a husband. You host your own podcast, or co-host, right? And a former
Yeah,
athlete. Um, and these are just some of the hats that you wear. So, like, what do these roles mean to you, and how do you think they serve your work as a counselor?
they mean everything. I think one of the biggest things I remember from my time at Walsh University, I was duly licensed when I came out, so I did have my school counseling license. And coming from business, when I was interviewed, one of the first things that the professor asked me, and it was Dr. Anderson, and she's no longer with us, but she asked me this question. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. She said, I see you have a business resume. Why do you want to be a therapist? I said, wow, that's like right off the rip. That came in hot. I don't even know what I should say to that, but it was like really good example of gatekeeping. and a really good example of letting me know how serious this field was. And the one thing that I will always remember that I think a lot of other fields don't credit enough is self care. So the more hats that I wear, if I have appropriate boundaries with them, it's only going to make me a better therapist. So when I go home, my two and a
Mhm.
half year old and my 8 month old, they don't care about what dad heard on the day. They don't. They care that dad walked through the door. My wife is a physical therapist, so we're just like a marriage of helpers. And we're going to have an argumentation over who's really going to help who because we're both probably tired. And then we have to, 1v1 with the kids. It's not like a 2v1 situation. There's no zone defense anymore. Once you add multiple kids, you both got one of them at one point in time. But that also helps me continue to live life as Quebec. And I think that's very important. Like, I can't just continue to live life through this lens of I have a certain set of skills. I sound like I'm leaving something taken. I have a certain set of skills, but that's about it. Everything else in life, I'm the same as my client. And if I'm going to sit there and tell my clients, hey, you should work out, be balanced, make sure you leave work at work, check in at home, I better be doing the same thing, or else how am I going to role model and how can I feel authentic and real? I can't have people come into my office and have an authentic, unreal conversation and then try to act like I'm better than them just because of my job. That doesn't work for me. That doesn't seem real. And if I want them to be vulnerable and be real, I have to do all the things that take care of myself. So all those hats essentially are my self care.
Mhm. Yeah, that if you wear one for too long, like it could really cause issues in another. And yeah, that really humanizes it. I think that's so important. Just attended a training with one of our divisions last week, talking about soul care, like extending that idea of self care into soul care, and that we have to like make sure we're taking care of ourselves as humans, like you're saying, um, to make
That's
sure.
so fascinating. That word.
Yeah, yeah, um,
I'm sorry to cut you off. That's just
yeah.
so fascinating. That word. We use that word at the General
Oh, really?
Shepherd. That's one of our pillars is to we do soul care. And that's trying to make sure that we look at the holistic person, that we're caring for the soul.
Hmm.
I guess I should clarify at the General Shepherd, we are also a Christian based organization. So, again, it's not that you have to be Christian to
Hmm.
come and seek therapy from us, but we do carry that biblical, spiritual orientation, and we're out about the
Hmm.
situation. So, when you say soul care, that's crazy you said that because that is something that our company very much stands 10 toes deep in representing.
And then it can expand like to that humanistic approach too, which is helpful to make sure that like we as counselors are modeling great behavior for our clients, not only because we want to be good models, right? But also because it's how we survive, right? It's how we maintain our own wellness. And part of that is through boundaries between roles and many other, like, I guess, like strategies that you even mentioned, like making sure we have that balance and um, moving our bodies, but also like having, shared responsibilities with others. All of that can kind of contribute to how we're doing well, or alternatively maybe how we're not doing so well. So definitely I appreciate you humanizing that. And this means, a lot to you. I can tell by, the way you're talking about it, and the excitement you have. So um, sharing that you're adopted and grew up even in a predominantly white space, it seems, like that you've had this unique perspective, not just in the counseling field, but it also extends here as like a Black man who's serving maybe predominantly white clients. How do you conceptualize and work with like different racial barriers in the field?
It's just what I know. So it's very normal for me, and I love it. I love being able to redefine what blackness is for people because, again, there's a lot of people that are probably going to come into my office needing help. And if I can set the tone, set the tempo, and be a role model, the back door of the situation is humanizing blackness. Again, I'm a young man. I love hip hop music. I have two voices of tattoos. I try to tell people I'm probably the most authentic person you'll ever meet. And part of my struggle was, and I use this example a lot, is I think a Fresh Prince of Bel Air reference. I felt that I had to be more Will than Carlton, but
Mm.
the reality points to I can be both. And so I want to help change that narrative. If I look up to somebody like LeBron, LeBron works on combating racism at the upper echelon, top 1% of the world because of his earning potential. So he can fight that up there. There are other people that are from inner city that are going to be potentially more digestible and more respected in the inner city. I'm not from inner city. I don't want to act like I am. I don't want to act like I know. So I got to fight racism in the playground that I know. And
Mm-hmm.
so I relish the opportunity to see a high percentage of white clientele, but I also relish the opportunity to work with people of color and to be kind of a beacon of hope that says this is a safe place. Either way, I know that I'm trying to push diversity and in our field forward, and also trying to bring awareness to not just the black community.
Yeah. I like the Fresh Prince analogy. Like I'm an elder millennial, but definitely can understand that. So I hope that other people can benefit from that too. It's a really great way to put it into context, I feel like.
Well, for the people that can't maybe necessarily catch on to that one, yeah, sorry, that's my young brain. It's like I think when we look at President Obama, some people are going to say he's whitewashed. He speaks too clearly. He's not black enough. We're removing his black
Mhm.
card. But if you look at LeBron, you know, athletic, tattoos, a little loose with his language at times. That's like he's a black man. He carries himself well. He gets it. He represents the culture. So I'm kind of pitted in between them, right? I talk more clearly. I might not speak in as much slang or whatnot, and that's just what I know. Sometimes in life, a defensive mechanism is trying to cover that up. I try to help clients not do that. But in order to help clients not do that, I also have to represent that myself. So it's a journey for me as much as it is for them, and even the way I represent myself as a professional. I don't ever want anybody to doubt my professionalism, and I want to again make sure I'm not only representing myself appropriately, I'm representing my team at General Shepherd appropriately. People know me for being a soccer coach at my local high school or my local club, so I still represent them. I represent my church. I represent my wife. I represent my co-host who's sitting across from me right now. And all those things are important to me to at any given moment that when I'm behind a microphone or just out and about, I want to make sure I represent that appropriately.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And I think like to your point, representation matters and that like um it's maybe I'm trying to think of the right word to use. Inappropriate for us to consider that like any one person falls under one umbrella, right? Because of their skin color or because of their gender or sexuality, religion, any of those like characteristics that we also may come with these other intersections and these other hats and these other responsibilities or things that, like are unique to us as individuals that like my personality is this. And I also like, right, am this like, I think of people who like say like, yeah, I am spiritual and I swear a lot or something, like that there's sometimes truths for different individuals. And so um whether you feel like you need to speak one way or the other is kind of that's your individual identity, how you want to speak, right? And you can humanize that for
I
your
just try to be
clients.
real.
Yeah. Right? Like
That's just what I try to
that's
do.
what's real for
Just be
you.
real and
Yeah. And
Yep.
we have to, like, I would say, encourage our clients to own that realness in themselves, their humanity in themselves too. I love it.
That's where I'm very direct as a therapist. So I am working on tapering that down a little bit because it probably can be a bit too aggressive. But I just try to tell people within the first 30 minutes that I'm a combination of three things. One, I think I'm funny. I may not be funny, but I think I'm funny. Two, just take a look around my office. It's very relaxed. It's very calming. It's got some kind of outdoor lights that I've put up, and it's a reflection of me. And three, I'm very professional, and I always tell them, number one, you can't say anything that's going to impress me. I've heard everything that you can think of over the past 6 years. Nothing that you say is going to impress me or surprise me. And I just try to taper the expectations and let them know that the only way that this works is if we're real. Because if I'm talking to a teenager, I'm going to tell that teenager, depending on their age, let's say they're 14. In 4 years, life is going to grab you by the throat and it's going to drag you around, and nobody's going to care. Because that's what happens after you're 18. You're playing on a completely different playground. The way that we can be arrested or legal charges can come against us is very real. The stakes have grown. There's not as much safety nets of a high school where you have a teacher that wants to invest in you, and you have a school counselor there to help you figure out all the resources. Like, all those resources are gone, and it's you. You want to go take out student loans and then fail your first semester? You gonna pay.
Yes, you are.
You gonna pay that money, and that college is not going to care. And that would be the moment where life is going to grab you by the throat, and it's going to leave you there, and you have to be able to understand, I put myself in this position. So let's have real conversation in my office. Let's be honest. Let's be vulnerable. Let's learn how to talk. Let's learn how to become one with ourselves in a safe place, so that when those situations arise, you can't leave my office saying, well, Q, I never had that conversation. No, my friend, you had that conversation with me. We went through the pros, we went through the cons. I didn't tell you what to do. I didn't tell you what not to do, but you at least had the conversation with me now.
Yeah, we had that discussion where we tried to get really real and figure out what the path forward would be. Yeah, I appreciate that. Um, has this, like, directedness helped you, or has it ever presented challenges, like, in sessions?
Oh, I'm sure it does. And I will apologize to people at times because I will be like, hey, I know that I'm being direct because I'm fully authentic in myself and comfortable in myself. I'll let them know. I'm like, hey, are you sure you really want this? Because we're going to get very real very quick. And like, this is what professional Q looks like. I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm not here to make fun of you. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to help your head and your heart get in alignment and try to make you become the most authentic and the healthiest person. Like, my job is to hold your feet to the flames of wellness. And that gets uncomfortable. That doesn't mean I'm going to tell you exactly how to be well. I'm trying to empower your voice so that when you make a decision, if you fall, it's okay. At least you know you made that decision. I'm going to be here to help you up, and we'll process it. We'll go through the pros and cons. But I try to tell people, you are the president of your life. You are the architect, the engineer, and designer of your life. At no point in time are you going to be able to say, Q, my therapist told me to do blah, 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 blah. That's not me. I have my own life. That is for you to decide. We're going to deal with whatever. So I try to give people the out 30 minutes into session because that's how I introduce myself. And my first homework question to all of my clients, it doesn't matter if you're a teenager, an adult, somebody that is an elder, when you leave, just think about whether you like me or you don't. I try to say, I work in the business of wellness, not the wellness business. I work in the business of wellness. Why do I say business first? A, you're paying me. Let's just be honest about the situation. You're paying me. B, when you're making an investment, you want to quantify that you're going to have a return on investment. If you don't like me, and you don't trust me, and you don't think we can have a good relationship, there is no chance on God's green earth that we're going to get to wellness. So I try to give people the out. I try to introduce myself. I try to lay it all down in session one before they even tell me why they're there, so that they can be comfortable and craft expectations on who Q is as a therapist and what they're going to get if they come into my office.
Yeah. Reframing like that directedness and sort of setting the groundwork. It sounds like it's a a pretty explicit informed consent. um, Here's what you're signing up for and what you can expect moving forward. So I can see there's a lot of value in that. Yeah. Um, you mentioned like because of the work that you do and some of like the responsibilities and respect you have for your roles, like you're involved in like different spaces within your community, um, in your church, in coaching, in the schools. Can you share a little bit more about like some of those hats that you wear and like why you think it's important for counselors to be actively involved within their communities?
Yeah, I think some of it is just natural for me. When I lost coaching soccer, which I willingly gave that up because I had a son, working in private practice, a lot of your hours are evening hours, so there was no way to kind of coach and be a therapist at the same time and have kids and be a productive husband. So some of my advocacy and some of the hats that I wear come by way of just trying to keep in touch with the schools, change my approach or change my role. So I work with my local school, Jackson High School, at times, doing some mental fitness stuff, having mental fitness conversations, or trying to help with racial issues if racial issues are popping up. I try to offer myself as a former graduate, somebody that was K through 12 there, and as well as somebody that's a professional that is still in the network. The roles that I have at church, I'm just a church musician. I sit and play drums, and that's just because I've grown up there. Been there since I was in diapers, and the music minister has known me literally since I've been a child. So him watching me develop as a musician, always knowing that I had an ear for how they play, what they do, because I've just been there. That just kind of fell in my hand and fell in my lap. Sometimes I do want to get more involved in the church, but I feel like serving as a music minister is the perfect avenue for myself.
Yeah. What advice would you have for counselors, new or in the field for a while, who might want to get involved in their community for the first time?
Yeah, I just try to tell. So I have two supervisees at the moment right now, and I just try to tell them to take everything as a journey. Take it as it comes. The more sometimes you try to force something, the more you may miss when you're supposed to come in contact with it. I think that's part of a spiritual thing. Again, just being a believer in Christ, I know that I will be where I need to be when I need to be there. Sometimes I just don't know the timing. So being at General Shepherd, I just didn't know the timing. I knew I wanted to be there. I hoped that I was going to be there. I did everything I could to be there, but there was no telling if it was actually going to happen. So sometimes it's something that just has to come to you, and when you are open to it and you see the right opportunity, just like us having this conversation, part of me wanting to be here is again to step into a role where I'm letting people know that there are black males that are therapists that can do this job. That's part of being an agent of change. That is part of advocacy. It just so happens to coincide with me doing a podcast and trying to get more comfortable behind the microphone. So it was really just a moment that all collaborated at the right time. So sometimes you have to be patient, but then there is sometimes where you have to force yourself to get outside of your comfort zone. That's tough.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that you added like in there some openness to it, right? Like openness to the adventures as they come, but also like being willing to recognize like, and maybe discern which ones are right for
Right.
you. Yeah, I love that. Um, you mentioned your podcasting, and so like you shared some of your own personal experiences, like outside of the counseling role, like as a father, as a husband, as a Black man. But you've also in this podcast paired it with like practical tools for addressing concerns, like with anxiety, for example. Why do you think it's important that counselor, like we as counselors, share our own stories?
I just think it humanizes us at the end of the day. And I think that's so powerful for clients to, again, remember, I'm taking the Liam Neeson quote from Taken, the movie. I have a certain set of skills. That's about it. Outside of that, you and I are walking the same ways. So even if I worked with celebrities, your celebrity status doesn't matter. You and I still have to do the same things in the best way possible. So, like, again, if I was sitting with LeBron, LeBron and I have a challenge to be the best father possible. Just because he's LeBron, he doesn't get to avoid the same challenges that I'm going to avoid either. So I think sometimes the disclosure with boundaries and ethical guidelines in mind really ultimately bring the client and the therapeutic relationship closer, stronger, and it again helps them remember that we're still going through the same thing too. We still have to grow as people. It's not just about being a professional. And when clients see that, it opens the door for powerful experience for them. And again, I'm trying to be the best therapist possible. And please, whoever is listening to this, I hope you understand. I don't care about accolades. Like, I don't ever care to be the number one counselor in Ohio. I don't care to be the counselor of the month. I don't care for any of that. I think that's where, when you start caring about those things, you lose the purpose of why you're doing it. And the people that I look up to the most, whether that's God, I'll use another soccer player, Messi, who's the best player to ever walk the face of the earth, who's playing in Miami right now. When I watch his documentaries, what people say about him is he's just one of the guys. He's very shy, and all he wants to do is just respect the game of soccer and continue to enjoy it, be a good husband, a good man. The only thing I care about for the next 30 or 40 years is respecting the art form of counseling, respect the ethical excellence that it takes, respect the goal to be a master of my craft. And if I do all those things, it will be what it's going to be. But the moment I start looking at things that don't matter, I think that's when people do unethical things. They end up getting their license taken. They end up creating dual relationships, and
Hmm.
all that does is hurt.
Yeah, yeah. And I keep saying I appreciate because I am so grateful for this conversation. But I like what you said about like like the disclosure is important. And I think like you probably can recall from like your counseling training program, some of the textbooks I know I've taught from and learned from, like very, like trepidatious about disclosure as a technique in the counseling world, but like especially in sessions, but that there is something to be said about disclosing that we're on the same path in a lot of ways. Like, yes, we've been taught a lot of things and this is our area of expertise, but like we still have to go on these journeys.
So I'll give you some examples, right? So when we're talking about that, like if I have a couple that's in my office and they're struggling with connecting and talking, I'm like, hey, you think my wife is going to like this either? If I don't come home and take care of the kids? No, she's going to kill me. I'm not telling you anything that is deep. I'm not disclosing anything that's very serious. I'm letting you know that what I'm saying, I have to go home and do. I'm a very big golfer, addict, obsessed golfer. So in the corner of my office, people always see golf clubs. The thing that I most like about golf, it's something that I can't master, and it's a reflection of life. Because wherever you send the ball, you send the ball. So if you hit the ball 5 yards and it goes to the ladies' tees, you hit the ball 5 yards and it went to the ladies' tees. You can't blame anybody other than yourself. So if you start pouting and whining and throwing a temper tantrum, that's a reflection of you. So even when I have those little things like, guys, I love golfing, but I still suck. Like, there are still things that are hard for me that I have to overcome and then I have to do. Um, there's another one that I share with people at times. I'm reading a book from Phil Stutz. I don't know if you've watched the Stutz documentary on Netflix. It's a conversation between Jonah Hill and his psychiatrist. If you have not watched it, it's fantastic. And I'm reading his book. Somebody gave it to me. And one of the things he said is you have to work on the reversal of desire. The reversal of desire is convincing ourselves that we want and accept pain, because on the other side of pain is unlimited possibility. So one of the things I tell my clients that's very real that I hate is swimming. I hate going underwater. Don't want to do it. I'm pretty sure my mom probably dropped me underwater one point in time when I was a kid. I wasn't ready for it. It left a bad taste in my mouth. Now I hate swimming. The problem with that is, with two boys and a wife that's a fish who loves swimming, if I don't get in the pool, if I don't do the cliff jump, the consequence of me staying in my safe zone is astronomical because it doesn't set a good example. If my baby falls into the pool and I'm not the first dude to hit the water, that's a problem. If there is any hesitation, that's a problem. So
Mhm.
the three tips that he
Mhm.
gives is one, the first thing you have to say is bring it on. Two, I love pain or anxiety or whatever the word is. And three, the pain will set you free. And the more that you start to repeat that, the more he says you tap into what he calls the force of forward motion. And the more you input that, it will then allow you to go to a bank account that will inspire you to do something that you said you couldn't do. So when I share that with clients, I said, like, hey, look, there's still things that I need to work on as a person that I don't want to pay the consequences for. I don't want to pay those consequences. I don't want to display something inappropriate to my son. I want my sons to be confident. I want them to want to go swimming and doing all those things. So even me, I have fears that I have to overcome. To me, that's not deep disclosure. That's just humanizing that we still have challenges as therapists, as people to work on, just like you.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, like we sort of that like feel it to heal it mentality. Like we have to do hard things sometimes to move forward in meeting our goals and in maybe meeting like opportunities on our journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think we become the people we want to become without adversity. Um, Again, I'll quote the book. In that book, it says that a lot of people in their safe zones, we have made avoidance acceptable. Yet, our safe zone or the comfort zone, all that does is lead to untapped potential, which leads to regret, which leads to wasting an overwhelming majority of our life because we didn't want to get outside of the comfort zone, because we didn't want to welcome pain.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to check out. I know what Netflix documentary you're talking about, but I have not watched it. So I've been falling too much into some of the other other documentaries, but I'll have to add it to my wish list there.
That one's
Now,
good from two perspectives, by the way.
yeah,
Before you move on,
is
that
it?
one's good from two perspectives. You can watch it from a client perspective, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can also watch it from like a clinician's perspective. So when I went
Sure.
to watch it, I thought I was just gonna watch something cool. I was like, oh, Jonah Hill, like great actor. This seems to
Yeah.
be something cool. It's psychological in nature. It's talking about psychology. Awesome. Within 5 minutes, I was like, I should probably pull out my phone and start taking some notes because, from a professional standpoint, this is teaching me a lot of things that I actually agree with. And what can I learn through my professional lens?
Yeah. Yeah. I find myself doing that, always just evaluating and gathering information, no matter the documentary. It could be a fictional film, but I always am paying attention to like the therapist role. I'm like, how are they portraying us? So certainly, yeah. Now I know like you've been in the field for, several years now. So you've evolved. You're now supervising. What would you tell like new professional Quebec or even like counselor trainee, um, like given like what you know now as a more seasoned professional?
I would just tell them to enjoy the journey and to, and I told this to my supervisors the other day because I was talking about Stutz, this book, and I'm also going to, like I said earlier, going to be doing brain spotting, which I'm super excited about because it can be applicable to athletes too. And I told them, guys, sometimes I'm going to talk very passionately, and it's because I'm getting filled on something that is new. Please understand that that's not something that you guys have to run out and do tomorrow. Just because I'm your supervisor and I'm in a position of leadership and a position of power where you have to feel threatened or unknowledgeable, it's okay. It took me 6 years to get to this place. And for the majority of the first 2 to 3 years, I just focused on trying to get a handle on the job, just documenting well, making sure that I'm building rapport with my clients, making sure that in our case consultation with our team or just working with my supervisor, just getting those things down pat to where it's like the back of my hand, that is the most important. But I also give you the analogy at the General Shepherd when I started in 2018. I felt like I was like a freshman on the varsity team because that's how many experienced upper echelon, older clinicians were in my team. So it was intimidating. And I'm very, very competitive. If you can't tell, I am very competitive. But I had to take and learn how to remove the competition in a place in a space where competition doesn't exist. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate to compete with my teammates. It's not appropriate for me to try to say, well, I need to have as much knowledge as this person, or I need to go learn EMDR right now because a bunch of people on my team are talking about it. It's okay. The time will come where those opportunities will present themselves and you're in a completely different headspace. You feel more confident in yourself, and now you can see the actual application versus just reading a whole bunch of stuff to the point where you have analysis by paralysis and you're forgetting just your introductory skills because there's so much going on. So I always try to remind early clinicians, CTs. I do a lot of interviews with like local college students that have to do that first clinical interview, and I just try to be very real with them. I try to advocate for self-care. I try to let them know that they can work in a magnitude of sectors. So whether that's community mental health, private practice, working with athletes, working with rehabilitation, probably working with felons, working with former military men and women. There's so many things that we can do as clinicians. Again, I just try to let them know, like, you will find your way. Just be patient. It's okay. We've all felt the way you felt before. Know that it gets better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, trust it, and like sort of the advice like of like let the journey find you in some ways. Don't rush to the next, like bright and shiny training or thing in your path. That sounds great advice. I think at any stage in your career, really, right? That can be really beneficial. So Quebec, we ask this question to all of our guests. It's based off the name of our podcast. We're called Ohio Counseling Conversations. So we always ask folks, like, what important conversations do you think counseling professionals should be having with each other and or their clients right now?
So for those of you that are independently licensed, like myself, I still think it's very important whether you're still connecting with your previous supervisor or whoever you trust in your team. And if you haven't really sought consultation in your team, maybe that is a place and space for professional growth. I think consultation is super important, and I'm very blessed that at our company we tend to consult with one another once a month. And in those moments, we all are able to let our hair down because we can't necessarily go home and talk to our spouses about what we hear in our office. And then we have the opportunity again, because I work at a Christian-based organization, we also pray and we have prayer requests, whether that's for clients, whether that's for the team, that God is always with us. I think those are powerful professional developmental moments. So again, I'm not trying to push spirituality on anybody. I can only speak from what I know and where I'm from. Some of the more important conversations that I'm seeing that is a trend is porn addiction, whether that's for teenage boys, whether that's getting in the way of marriages, even just sexuality for women. I think those are very large conversations, especially when it comes to like sexless marriages or not being able to just have that conversation. And I think naturally, with where we're at in life, the sexual orientation conversation and being able to be comfortable with that is a big conversation that is, I would imagine, is affecting everybody. And so just being able to find information on that, that's where professional consultation is important. We try to just build your confidence in being able to have that conversation with a client if they do bring that into the office. And sometimes that's not the first thing that they're going to say either. Sometimes maybe your paperwork doesn't bring that out in the diagnostic assessment, but it's a bomb that can be dropped later in, which then is going to inform they're presenting symptoms and why they're struggling with what they're struggling with.
Yeah. I so many parts of what you're saying are like hitting home for me because I'm like, oh, consultation. I, as an educator, am often telling, students in my classrooms, like, look around at the people who are sitting next to you. You've got your crew here. Like, you've established a crew in your cohort or just some friends in the program. And those people, like, if you keep them around, can be consultation buddies as you go along into the field. And so, like, I know, I've been licensed for about a decade now, and like my best friend from my program is still like my best friend, and we consult all the time. And so it's a common like practice if you let it be and you give yourself that sense of community. But then that also made me think about when we've consulted that, like, sex stuff comes up way more frequently than we felt like we were trained for initially. Even having had classes, I felt somewhat prepared and knew that this is going to be pretty common, that people would talk about it. But like sometimes to the degree, like, it's surprising in some ways, like that it wasn't expected or it wasn't discussed in the diagnostic assessment, that we have to be ensuring we're prepared for those conversations with clients for sure. Like, it's all ringing home, hitting home.
And I know I'll throw out what we use. We use impulse control disorder. That's the diagnosis that we use. It's more of a medically driven diagnosis, but it is also accepted by a lot of insurances. And that's kind of our way that we call out sexual issues or sexual integrity issues as we speak about it.
Mhm,
So,
mhm. Yeah, and it's always interesting to understand like the addiction component, but also like you mentioned, sometimes what's the impact on the relationships and the lack of communication skills that people or language that people have to communicate like something to their partner, for example. I find that that can sometimes be part of it, and it sort of mirrors, right? Like that maybe these conversations aren't being had enough in clinical and like community spaces or relational spaces for people to feel um, prepared to have the conversations, but even more evidence we should be having the conversations.
absolutely. Again, there's still a little bit of taboo nature to it, but I've used wherever I can find, again, whether that's podcasts, listening to professionals talk about it, reading books, so Sex on the Brain, Daniel Amen. I think his book is fantastic for that. Um, Raised on Porn, you can look it up on YouTube. It's a company called the Magic Lantern. It's about a 36-minute documentary free on YouTube. That's a really good informational. Um, I just try to surround myself with as much information about it as possible so that even if it's a teenage girl and she's talking about having sex for the first time, I can advocate for her just to make sure that she's aware of her body and that she's fully in control of the decisions that she's making. And again, this is in my head. If I have that conversation with a girl in my office with good boundaries and good ethical codes, if that prevents her from being sexually assaulted, then that father may never thank me, but they're thanking me because I just had that conversation with your daughter. I gave her agency. I helped her become more aware of herself, aware of her body, and aware of the decisions that she is making so that she could get out of that situation and advocate for herself. On the same token, if I'm helping a teenage boy understand the differences between real sex and pornographic sex and stopping the addiction from developing, helping him redefine the way that he looks at women to be able to have a healthier relationship with intimacy and I call it sexual energy. Now that puts them in a better situation for when I get married, we can have better intimacy because I had these foundational principles and I was challenged to understand what my behaviors could dictate.
Hmm. Yeah. Like, I think it's further evidence of the powerful work that we do as counselors that you're highlighting here. So I really appreciate that you've taken the time to share with us your own experiences and lots of great resources that we'll be sure to link in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up for today, Quebec?
No, I just very honored to have the opportunity to have this conversation. I hope I am representing us as professionals at the highest level. I hope anybody that is a person of color can know that there are other people like them that are out there that are doing this work. And again, the counseling industry has given me life. It's allowed me to take care of my family. It's allowed me to have a sense of purpose and identity in my professional life. And the only thing I want to do is just give back to it. So I hope that anybody that does listen to this, I'm not right. I might not be wrong. I just try to speak from the heart. I try to speak from the way that I see things, but I'm not ultimately the end all be all. And hopefully it came across as respectful to our industry. And that's the only thing I care about is just honoring everybody and pushing mental health forward.
Yeah. And I think you're spot on in that, like, all voices are valued. What's right for one person may not be right for everyone, but your voice matters. And we're so happy that we got to hear it today. So I really appreciate you being here. And we will catch the rest of you next time. So be sure to tune in to Ohio Counseling Conversations, and we'll chat with you soon.
Ohio Counseling Conversations is on a mission to make this podcast meaningful to you, and we can't do that without your help. A feedback form is linked in the show notes for this episode and is also available on the OCA Linktree. If you have any recommendations for topics or guests or any other general feedback, you can let us know by using the form. We welcome your thoughts so that we can continue to develop the podcast and grow as creators. If you are interested in joining the team or being a guest, you can also reach us by emailing ohiocounselingconversations@gmail.com. We value your insight. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow us so you can stay up to date with Ohio Counseling Conversations online and wherever you listen to podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Counseling Association's Media, Public Relations, and Membership Committee and its podcast subcommittee. This podcast features original music selections by Elijah Satoru Wood and our closing song, Accretion Discotheque by Who AD. Views, beliefs, or references mentioned in this episode do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the Ohio Counseling Association. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect the view of the Ohio Counseling Association or any of its officials. Thank you.